I am going to read the fifth book of the life and teachings of the Masters of the Far East. And in the first part of this book, there is a biographical sketch of Baird Spalding. And during the course of reading this book, I'm going to be doing a lot of commenting myself, because some of the things in this book concern me and my present day happenings that are happening with me. So just be prepared, because maybe not in this one, but in some of the ones that come along, I will be making some comments about what I'm reading. This is the biographical sketch. Whenever there is a flare of general interest in any personality or his achievements, such as has been evinced by the readers of the life and the teachings of the Masters of the Far East, you may be certain there is a flame of spiritual truth accompanying it. Few in modern times have created such an interest as Baird Spalding, whose name became legend in metaphysical and truth circles during the first half of the 20th century. Few since the flame of spiritual inspiration sweeping the world as did Mr. Spalding. The nature of the man, the manner in which his message has been presented, and the message all bear living testimony to the truth of his words and to the honor and sincerity of the man. The countless numbers of letters received through the years from all over the world bear testimony of the tremendous assistance from the message contained in his books, and such letters continue to pour in years after he passed over to a higher schoolroom. Baird Spalding passed beyond the veil on March the 18th, 1953, in Tempe, Arizona, at the age of 95. He was active in his mining interest right up to the end. Douglas K. DeVorce probably knew Mr. Spalding as well as anyone, due to their many years of association. And we quote from his talk given at the Spalding Memorial Service in Tempe, Arizona, on March the 22nd, 1953. Mr. Spalding was a very quiet, humble servant of all whom he met. He would never permit me under any circumstance in presenting him to audiences to dwell on the personality or on himself as a man of great accomplishment. Since 1935, I had the unique opportunity of traveling with him to more than 200 cities in North America. And though I lived with him almost 24 hours a day in a very close relationship most of those years, yet I must be frank and tell you that I do not believe any one person or group of persons really understood this great soul, for so many different ways, on so many different planes of activity. In making these few personal remarks, I am sure you understand we are doing this in a very humble way, because not only was he our friend, but a man who was like a father to many of us. There was not a town of any size anywhere in the world that I know of where Mr. Spalding couldn't walk into someone's home and sit down to dinner. He was always welcome, and during the past 25 years he lived very much, as we say, like a bird. He seemed to have reached a point of attainment where material things were not of great concern to him. Although his earnings as an individual over a period of time were unknown to me and to all of us, nevertheless he passed on not as a rich man at all. His material possessions are few. The great heritage which he left is in the unique discoveries which he made regarding the teachings of Jesus. Mr. Spalding never wrote or lectured for financial profit or gain, and he was an open channel for any funds that came to him, distributing them immediately. We have no way of knowing the extent of his philanthropic enterprises, because no one ever approached him who was in need of any material assistance that he didn't give them everything he had. And consequently, he was always a very prosperous man. In fact, I know of no one who, in a way, was as rich as Mr. Spalding. And many of us envied his unique attainment, which he had reached through his very exceptional understanding and which undoubtedly came to him very early in life. It was about 65 years ago that he first made some of these discoveries regarding Jesus and the lives of the great masters. He walked and talked with great masters in the visible world, even as did the great scientist Mr. Steinmetz, of whom he was a great admirer. I have seen pictures of Mr. Spalding and Mr. Steinmetz together. Both Steinmetz and Edison predicted that the time would come when it would be possible for us to make recordings of the Sermon on the Mount and in the actual language and voice of Jesus at the time when he gave the Sermon on the Mount. Many other startling discoveries and disclosures, as I like to refer to them, were made by Mr. Spalding during his long life of service and activity in all parts of the world. For instance, I want to go back to the idea of how his books came to be published. I have been told by people who knew Mr. Spalding in Calcutta, India, in the early 90s, that he decided to write out in longhand some of the accounts of his experiences in India. Some friends asked him to type it and let them have copies, and for many, many years he carried these typewritten accounts of what later became Volume 1 with him. People would read them and pass them among themselves until finally a very prominent woman in Oakland, California, whose husband was the builder of the Oakland Municipal Railways, asked Mr. Spalding if he would have any objection to her having her printer, the California Press in San Francisco, print 1,000 copies of his work in an inexpensive paper binding. She wanted to give every one of her friends a copy of that book. Mr. Spalding gave his consent, and soon after this he left for England. The books were printed and passed among her friends as a gift. Within about 60 days, phenomenally as it seems, more than 20,000 orders were received for copies of that book. When Mr. Spalding returned from England, of course he was astonished at the interest in his discoveries and experiences, so he permitted her to have the balance of the work published, which became known as Volume 2. Then there was a period of about 10 years that Mr. Spalding did not do any writing, but nearly every night he was a guest or was visiting friends, and after dinner he would have a little question and answer period, and in that way he met a great many people. After his day's work was done as a research engineer, he would answer the many questions put to him at these little gatherings, and the word-of-mouth publicity spread very rapidly. But that work came to a halt during the period when Cecil D. DeMille was making the movie picture The King of Kings. Mr. Spalding was engaged by Mr. DeMille as technical advisor on all the biblical work in that picture. My experience with Mr. Spalding started about 25 years ago. I was particularly interested in the books and their distribution throughout the world. At that time there was a great upward surge in new thought and spiritual readings and studying, and many people were very anxious to have Mr. Spalding complete another book. Finally, one of his very closest friends invited him to a country cabin where he could work without interruption, and Mr. Spalding completed in longhand what is now known as Volume 3. That book was published immediately. A rumor started spreading across the country that Mr. Spalding had passed on, so I suggested to Mr. Spalding that since he was not sailing for India and a trip around the world until October the 4th, that we go to New York together, stopping at some of the larger cities en route, and meet the many people who had been reading his books and disprove the false rumors being generated. Mr. Spalding agreed that this would be a good idea if it would be accomplished in about 30 days. So the latter part of August 1935, we selected 30 of the larger cities and decided to make that tour in 30 days. I have a reason for telling this because, as many of you know, Mr. Spalding, right up until just a few days ago, had almost unlimited energy in a physical form. He was never fatigued. He could go for maybe 2 or 3 weeks with only 3 or 4 hours sleep a night.